So I'm Damien Mohammed. I work for CPI. This is John, my colleague. And we are basically here today to talk about the collaboration between academia and industry. So I've only been with CPI for just over a month. So John's here with me, who's been with the company for how long?
4 or 5 years now.
4 or 5 years. And John's got a lot more experience than me to be able to talk about this. But actually, the reason why I felt it was important to talk about this is because I recently come from the growth company and work in investments inside the growth company. And a lot of the businesses that we found that were struggling to get investment for getting to that point of commercialization and innovation is actually because they weren't able to work with academia, etc. So John will be able to explain a little bit more about how we work with that within the CPI. So CPI, if people don't know, are predominantly based in the northeast of England. We also have a medicines manufacturing innovation centre we're building in Glasgow. And we're doing a little bit of work at the moment in Liverpool as well, with the University of Liverpool. So John, give me a bit of background about yourself and what you're working in the Northwest in.
Yeah, so I spent 25 years in the chemical industry, and then for the last 10 years I've been involved in knowledge transfer with the Knowledge Centre for Materials Chemistry. So when I actually started out that role, it was actually funded by the Northwest Development Agency, for those that remember, from 10 years ago-ish. And we were actually hosted by an organisation called Chemistry Innovation, which was the innovation strategy arm of the Chemistry Leadership Council, which is the national UK industry body. And that kind of reflected the strength of the North in general in the chemical sector, but the Northwest in particular as well. And there was a very, very rapid change at that time of the industry. So part of the purpose of founding this centre in knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer was to help the business to sort of reinvent itself and find new ways to work and develop its sort of future business opportunities. So it's been a really interesting time, and we're now hosted by the Catapult CPI through CPI, as Damien just mentioned, and we're actually self-funded through our partners, which include Manchester University, Liverpool University, and Bolton, and several others too. So.
Fantastic, great. So the collaboration between people like Innovate UK, obviously we saw earlier today, Innovate UK Edge, they're obviously helping us with the funding with certain projects for specific innovations, but the KCMC project that you work on, that's specifically with certain universities.
Yeah, so if you look at the sort of funding environment for research and development, which can contribute to the new business growth and addressing some of the challenges we face today, a lot of that's highly risky and too risky for businesses to do in isolation. So you'll have, government funding agencies like Innovate UK getting involved, and CPI is actually very close to Innovate UK. We work very closely with them in terms of both helping develop policy agendas, but also then developing collaborative programs to help address those particular challenges.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I suppose the first question then really is about why would a company consider collaborating with the university, and what the benefits are of doing that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And, I think if you look in the last 20 years or so, universities in the UK have massively invested in the UK science space. It's both facilities and in people, building skills. It's kind of mirrored the decline of the corporate R&D environment that's taken place in the same sort of timescale. So there's a huge resource of science capabilities. We've just heard a little bit about fuel cells, but there are many, many other areas, huge opportunity. Second to that, if you look at where technologies of the future are emerging from, we just had the example of the vaccines development from Oxford University. That's a really incredible thing that universities are driving some of those technology developments. So in a way, if you work with universities, you get connected into some of those future things. And that's as true in our sector, in chemicals and materials and applications of those, as in any other. If I look at what we've actually done in the last 10 years or so, we've helped businesses solve problems sometimes. We have quite knotty problems, science-based problems. We've helped businesses sort of explore new ideas in terms of areas they want to explore at relatively low risk. And crucially, I think, particularly for sort of innovation ecosystems, we help SMEs, because SMEs will often have a fantastic skill in one particular thing and one sort of set of capabilities, but they often need to access many more to be able to take their innovations to market. So, we help with that too. Sure. And finally, I think it's worth saying that the universities have attracted all this funding to build capability, but they've also got now good funding mechanisms to help collaborate with companies. So I think there's a good package there from that perspective.
And are we talking SMEs and startups, or are we talking big corporates, or is it a bit of both?
So it's really the full range, to be honest. So if you look at the kind of opportunities for where chemistry and materials can play a role in our future industries, it covers the full range from spin-outs, many from universities, but not all, through to more mature SMEs, through to big corporates. And they all have slightly different needs, of course, but and they have different ways of approaching business, but they all need this access and ability to take leading edge science and technology into their businesses.
Yeah, well, I suppose with what's happening in Glasgow with the Medicines Innovation Centre, we've got AstraZeneca, we've got GSK, we've got University of Strathclyde, some huge companies trying to solve massive grand challenges. Yep. So I suppose that the benefit of working with those will also then trickle down and help SMEs as well.
Exactly. So what you'll find is you'll have those lead companies often defining some of the bigger programs and the sort of some of the targets, but actually they'll need access to SMEs to bring their innovations and ideas into those programs as well. Yeah. And you'll definitely see that in these CPI-led programs up in the MMIC. Okay, great.
And we also heard earlier today people talking about kind of more digital solutions, so AI, all sorts of. Why do you see kind of the knowledge transfer world fitting in with the digital world, and how that can be kind of done better, or is it an advantage, is it a disadvantage? How does that work?
It's a really, really interesting area. I'm a little bit on the old side for that kind of debate in some ways, but so knowledge transfer itself is changing as you can start to see new tools emerge at the sort of knowledge transfer interface. Innovate UK recently launched a system called Confer, which helps connect people up in this kind of area. So I think that's all really good. But actually, if you look at what we do, we spend a lot of time just talking to people, in dialogue with companies and with our academic colleagues. And at the moment, there's no AI system which can do that kind of thing. So, but what we are seeing is massive growth in the number of projects. So we do hundreds of projects a year across our centre. And what we're seeing is very, very significant growth in the number of projects to do with these sort of digital innovations. So it could be around the way materials are discovered and developed. It could be around robotics and automation, the SME spin-outs in that area we're working with. Or it could be around big data and machine learning, application of AI techniques. And most recently, we've got a partnership with the STFC Hartree Centre, who are based just down the road in Runcorn. And we just got drawn into the application of quantum computing to our sort of technology area. So, really interesting area.
Well, that was the new one that was just announced the other day, wasn't it? Was it 240?
Yeah, so there's a big investment.
£240 million.
Absolutely.
Innovate UK.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're their partners in our centre as well, because digital is so important to many of the businesses that we work with. And most of them are ahead of the game in looking for the opportunities arising. So
great, fantastic. So when people are looking at collaborating with universities, what does a successful collaboration look like? I mean, what's the best way to approach them? Is it to go through someone like ourselves, or is it to kind of contact people directly? Is it through the academics? Is it through the business engagement area? What is a successful collaboration with an academic, with a university?
So I kind of think each one is unique in a way. So it depends on the company and how they approach. We just talked about SMEs versus startups and corporates. It depends on the academic. It depends on many things, but what we need, let's say, if you have a really clear problem you want to address, and the three things we would look for: one is there a fit between what that particular company is looking for and what we can access through our networks. Now, we don't always have a fit in what we do, and the same would be true for other sort of knowledge transfer groupings and all the rest of it. But what we then do is we rapidly refer people to someone who can help them. I think that's really important, that we try and build a connected network that is sort of self-helping, if you like. So referrals is a really important part of that. But the bulk of what we do, obviously, is not referrals. So there's looking at the match. Then you need someone to lead make things happen in the university environment. Universities are great institutions, but they're also complicated sometimes. You'll hear little echoes. It can be difficult to get things to happen. So you need someone who will lead that process in the university. So the academic champion's important. And then the third really critical element is funding. So you need a credible funding route to make things. If you haven't got money, then you're very limited in what you can do. So we need to understand what sort of funding and option will be consistent with the kind of intellectual property requirements of the business or organisation we're dealing with. And what you'll find is organisations like CPI and ourselves, KCMC and others, they're all getting more and more sophisticated in their ability to deal with these sort of multiple simultaneous equations. So I think in general in the UK, we're getting lots better at this. We've got innovation hubs forming. All of these things can help unpick these problems. Our particular expertise in what we do is in materials and chemistry and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But CPI's got a lot more to offer than that in that sense of sector expertise. So.
Sure. So with the funding element then, I suppose there's still a little bit of ERDF funding available. We're still a little bit of that out there until... It's
a very confusing environment at the moment because we're seeing government change its approach in the UK. We're seeing the kind of access to Europe sort of continue, we think. So, we're reaching out in all these directions, and actually I'd say that part of the skill of organisations like CPI and our own particular sort of knowledge transfer area is to really be the eyes and ears in a sense of trying to understand what's going on in those funding groups, and then to see how we can leverage it for the needs of our particularly industry stakeholder groups, which could be, chemicals industry, but it could be more regional groupings, such as, you've been talking a little bit about, already today. So, but I think there's a key skill there, which is understanding and being able to make it work for the people we interact with in our industry and in our academic environment.
And do you see so obviously we've got the devolved regions within the UK, such as Greater Manchester, portion of that funding for the levelling up fund, etc., is going to be going towards that. Do you see a collaboration between the kind of places strategy going alongside the academic strategy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think these are all possibilities. I think the way we've always approached it is, it's great to be able to work along that and to influence it. The key thing, though, is you need the good industry relationships and the good relationships with the thought leaders and academia to actually make things happen. Because at the end of the day, whatever the funding mechanism, you're always going to come back to, I've got a brilliant business case and I've got some people who can really, make it happen.
Sure.
So.
And I think from my perspective, my experience in my previous roles is once you've got that proof of concept and you've done the consideration, the validation piece, that's when you can go to the private funders, and that's when you can go to investors, and that's when you can unlock doors with angel investors, with VCs, with...
And there are developments there at CPI as well, because we've got this arm, CPI Enterprises, which is helping to develop that theme, and we're quite well connected to some, of the funders in this area through UCRI, for example, and Midven, and, some of the early stage folk, because, again, that's important to our university partners, because, as I mentioned before, universities are actually acting as a real source of new technical innovations now, which is translating into business opportunities. So they need to figure out how to solve those equations too. So it's a really interesting time for that, where I think, particularly in an area like the sort of process industries where CPI's core is, it takes a lot of expertise and know-how to help make things happen because, the investment sort of profile of companies in this space. So really interesting. Yeah,
well, especially when you've got things like Northern Gritstone, which has been announced, which is the collaboration between Manchester University, Leeds and Sheffield with this £500 million hopeful pot of money, which sounds fantastic, and that will support a lot of spin-outs from those universities, but also some of that money will be spent on other spin-outs as well from other universities. So things like that collaboration with universities for people like ourselves and for industry to work alongside, I think is fantastic. I think that's really going to unlock a lot of innovation.
Exactly. And having the good relationships to enable that thing to happen is really critical. Yeah. So, I'm delighted you've joined the team because, I'm sure you'll be really...
Thank you. That's great.
An excellent piece for that.
Good. Well, that's my background is the kind of on the investment side of things and the commercialization of things. But I think the technical expertise within CPI, I think something like 450 engineers and scientists that work for the company. So I think we're in good hands with bringing companies alongside. One of the things that we talked about was the mechanisms for the collaboration and how you find the best fit. I think we've kind of covered that a little bit already with
I
some
think
of the
we
stuff.
probably have.
With some of that stuff.
I
Some
mean,
of the things.
I would just sort of note that this is changing all the time. So we look at, you know, direct consultancy, private funded research, grant funded, you know, a whole range of things. The key is you focus on what's the challenge, and it's accessing that knowledge of what's out there to help. But one recent development is obviously there's big announcements have come out recently about you know, major funding in, you just referred to some of those things, and the Hartree investment. But actually it can be the little things that can be the most important to companies. And one of those little things that I think is really impactful is the Knowledge Transfer Partnerships Program. Yeah. And a good piece of news from CPI is that CPI has recently been agreed as a knowledge partner for those programs. And it kind of illustrates to me very nicely this sort of the issue of how do we join up the innovation landscape for companies on that innovation journey, whether they're bigger companies or smaller companies or startups. And the fact that we're now partnered with CPI through what we do is really positive in that sense, because it means we've got our eyes and ears out with the universities and working with them in terms of their processes, but we're also hooked into the higher TRL activities of the Catapult and what CPI can do to help in that space, and we're already seeing the benefit of that with the referrals and building new relationships and links in that way. So.
Well, I think with the knowledge transfer partnerships, I think there's an opportunity there for people like CPI to collaborate with the universities as well as with industry themselves. So I think that's not really been done before. I think a lot of the knowledge transfer partnerships have been done on a silo basis, whereas I think now's the opportunity to all work together and also cross-catapult, because you've got the digital catapults and you've got all the different types of catapults as well as the high-value manufacturing. So opportunity there, I think, for more collaboration, for more innovation. And then the last question really was just around trends and what trends you're kind of seeing for the future across, well, particularly with the subject today around academia and industry working together, but just general kind of trends that you're seeing.
So there's a couple of things I think worth sort of commenting on. One is UK government, PLC, whatever, has set itself this goal to raise GDP spend on R&D from 1.8 to 2.4% in the next 5 to 10. That's a huge challenge. So I think that intensity of R&D increase will only be achieved if we work together more effectively between government and industry. So I think public-private partnerships could be an important part of that, and for sure that's going to impact in the next 5 to 10 years. I think we've already touched a bit on the digital agenda, and we just had this huge investment in Hartree of a couple of $100 million to help, you know, support that process. So pretty excited about that. We're seeing some of that already. I've mentioned that. And the third thing we haven't really touched on, though, is that the world is changing around us at a speed which, you know, is quite amazing, isn't it? So if you look at things like climate change, sustainability, and the whole sort of issue of supply chains and globalizations, the sort of work that we do in chemicals and materials and CPI more generally is key to a lot of that. We've heard a little bit about hydrogen fuel cells earlier. That's one strand, but there are many, many other, whether it's plastic, end of life, you know, new ways to make energy, whatever. So there's some very exciting opportunities there too that will grow. Yeah,
I think I'd add to that as well is that the regions seem to have their own industrial strategies, and so some of those key industrial strategies really are about things like healthy aging. What else have we got? The low carbon agenda, etc. So I think as long as the industry and academia are aligned to those, I think that's really important. But John, thank you very much for the interview, and over to you. Thanks, Alona.
Thanks ever so much. Absolutely fascinating there in terms of that relationship between academia and industry. One of my previous roles was actually employer liaison within the University of Salford. So all those things there around it being kind of quite difficult to navigate, that can also be true even on the inside. So anything that's done to try and really open up the universities and make it easy for them to collaborate with industry has got to be a huge positive.